All right, thank you all. We have two really interesting research presentations. I'm going to start by introducing our speakers, and then Jonathan Nagler will go first. So Jonathan Nagler is professor of politics and affiliated faculty at the Center of Data Science at New York University. He is a co-director of the NYU Center for Social Media and Politics. His research focuses on voting in elections and the role of social media, as well as traditional media in politics. And then our second speaker will be Justin Grimmer. Justin Grimmer is the Morris M. Doyle Centennial Professor of Public Policy in the Department of Political Science and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University. His research focuses on elections, representation, artificial intelligence, and data science. So I will hand it over to Jonathan to go first.
Thank you. Lavendier's mic. Okay, hi. Thank you, Julia. So I'm gonna on our screen the names of other folks who worked on this. In particular, Wei Zong did a huge amount of heavy lifting on a lot of the stuff I'm about to show you. And so I'm going to talk about not about AI per se, but I want to talk about social media, and in particular social media and issues. And over this lengthy period, which happens to coincide with 3 Donald Trump elections, so let me sort of jump into things. And what we're interested here in this research is knowing essentially like what issues people encounter on social media, from what sources, and for me here, sources today means either media, politicians, or the public, or sort of mass public, and then conservative media, liberal media. But having said that, today, for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to focus on media, not politicians and the general public. And we're really interested in looking at how that's changed over the past 3 presidential elections. And finally, there's this key question: does this actually matter? Does it influence people's own perceptions or own attitudes about issues, and does it change their perceptions of candidates' positions on issues? And we sort of started this research a long time ago, thinking, oh, well, maybe social media will change what people perceive about candidates or believe about candidates. To cut to the punchline at the end here, it turns out that it seems to be more likely to be affecting, influencing people's own attitudes. We're going to jump over this one now. I'm not really going to talk about what people see here they don't see elsewhere, so let me go on. And a lot of what you're going to see comes from a paper that you could actually download if you're curious, on the 2016 stuff at least. Essentially, this is a result we noticed before that I mentioned a second ago, that what people followed on social media seem to relate to them changing their own attitudes, but not updating about the candidates. Okay, the data that I'm going to talk to you about comes from surveys, many, that were fielded by YouGov, designed by us, and we go through these 5 different elections. I'm not going to talk about the off-year ones today. We had 3 waves in 2016, 4 waves in 2020, and then another 4 waves in 2024. And I mentioned the digital trace data that we collect. Today I'm just going to be talking about the Twitter data that we collected. And let me go on. I want to talk a little bit about, and I have no idea how to remove the little thing on top that is blocking my clever titles. So I doubt they matter too much. So I want to talk, this is supposed to be methodological challenges here. We deal with a lot of tweets, and a lot of times people talk about big data a lot, and I just want to let you know, like, there are like a lot of zeros here. We do like billions of tweets for some of these projects. And on the one hand, you can say, well, no big deal, just wait for computing to catch up. I mean, you guys seem to write really slowly anyway, since it's 2016 data. But it actually is a problem in this sense. Tweets about politics are rare. Like, we can sort of read all the time that, oh, people get their information about politics online now, yada, yada. Yeah, that's true. But it's a very little part of what they're doing online. That's not why folks are going on social media or doing most of the things they do online. So these tweets are really rare. Tweets about specific political topics, even rarer. And so anytime we're working on, classifying some corpora, the false positives are a bad problem for us. Imagine that 1% of your tweets were about politics, which is not a crazy number, and we can get into, depending on how you define politics, what it really is. If your classifier has a false positive rate of 1%, which most of us would say is like, man, that's incredible, what a great classifier. Well, half the tweets you think are about politics aren't. And so we end up working with data that is noisy. Now, you can correct for this in a lot of circumstances just by calibration, and you'll say, okay, but I can get the number right. But that won't help you on individual cases, and when you're trying to use individual tweets as variables in your data analysis, this becomes an issue for us that we really need to focus on. The other methodological challenge we deal with is that the Twitter data used to be easy to collect. I mean, easy in the relative sense. Now Twitter data is prohibitively expensive to collect at I'm not quite sure that's why that says at any scale, but at real scale. Like, we can collect a little bit of Twitter data. And so whereas we used to have this kind of paradox of, we're spending all our time on Twitter, even though it's not really the biggest social media platform, now we just can't be there at all. And the problem is, it's not like the other social media platforms are easy to get data from. We now are more dependent on data donations, web browsing, YouTube, TikTok, you can name your favorite platform. They're all hard. TikTok is particularly technically challenging for people to give us their TikTok data is non-trivial. And we need to pay people to do this, even if it were easy. And so we live in a world where data access is much, much tougher than it used to be. Okay, we asked respondents about 11 issues in 2016. We asked their own view on the issue. We asked them where they thought candidates stood in the issue. Here are the list of issues we used. I'm really, for the most part, just going to be talking about immigration throughout here and a couple of other issues. This is what we started with in 2016, though. You'll see immigration, healthcare are sort of the big ones that stick with us. And we asked about use of military force, which is a little bit odd to do in 2016, but it turned out in 2024 that was a little bit more important. A subset of people gave either us directly or YouGov their Twitter handles. We're thus able to get data on what they were doing on Twitter. And we're going to break the accounts they follow into media, politicians, and what we're going to call non-elites, which is a little clumsy today, but I'm not going to talk to you about that anyway. I'm going to focus today on that first row, media accounts. As you can imagine, we're also playing around with influencers they follow and just their friends, the people who are non-elites. But today it's media. Okay, I'm going to show you a lot of numbers, and I'll try to focus on the ones that matter more here. Okay, so what am I showing you? So this is media exposure by ideology. It's the mean number of tweets that our respondents saw, in this case in 2016, in between the first and third wave of a survey, from two kinds of media. And now this is where I am in trouble because that thing is blocking something. The blue dots are tweets. Go for it. Yeah, awesome, Jacob. Terrific. But I can tell you the blue dots are tweets seen from liberal media, and oh man, cool. No. All right, wow, thank you. Okay, blue dots are liberal, conservative, red boxes, conservative media. And so you can just sort of see here that, okay, military force in 2016 is really big. I have no idea why that is. You'll see that immigration is big, and conservative media outlets much more likely to talk about this than liberal ones. When this gets, okay, Jacob, you broke it, man.
I broke it?
Yeah.
You might need to click on the background. It might be on the.
Say that again?
You might need to click on the slide.
Click on your slide.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, politicians, we're not gonna, okay. This is a bit of a more interesting way to look at it. Here's what Democrats are seeing, and here's what Republicans are seeing. And here, we're seeing that Republicans are just seeing a lot more in immigration, way more than Democrats, which is not too surprising. This is 2016, don't forget. Immigration is an issue, but the facts on the ground about immigration were much different in 2016 than they had become later on. Okay, politician exposure, we're going to jump over today. This is the 2020 version of this. Actually, I have no idea what my time is, but I'm going to go quickly anyway because I paste all these together. So.
I'll tell you in 5 minutes.
Cool, okay. All right. Okay, so, okay, this is 2020 then. and we're skipping politicians. And here's our 2020 breakdown, Democrats versus Republicans. And again, here you're seeing that, again, I want to focus on immigration. Now in 2020, Democrats, for whatever reason, are seeing more on immigration than Republicans are. And we see for Democrats, no surprise, I mean, Democrats just see more stuff from liberal media. Conservatives, obviously. Oh, the other point of this, sorry, I guess. She mentioned the obvious. Yes, there's polarization here that Democrats are seeing a lot of stuff from liberal media and Republicans are seeing stuff from conservative media. Sorry, they're homophily. That, like, yes, people are following stuff that they like. 2024, we get media exposure. And here, again, you see, gee, immigration is like a big deal among the topics. Okay, and 2024, bipartisanship. Again, you're seeing that for Democrats, they're seeing a lot of stuff on immigration. Military force comes up big here. Ukraine is happening. Gaza is happening. Kind of no surprise. We have a lot of things in military force here. But that's a lot, okay? I mean, people are seeing a lot, seeing a lot of tweets on this topic. Okay, the graphs I want to get into, which are I hope you can sort of see the comparisons here. What we're seeing is that immigration is big in 2024, and if you look at this, you see conservative media, loads of tweets. You sort of see the same thing in 2016, but if we go here, and now we've got. I'm just going to compare 2016 and 2024. We'll just jump over 2020. Excuse me. Now you're seeing, and bear in mind, in 2024, so immigration is the biggest thing we've got now. It's bigger than healthcare. It's become bigger than healthcare in 2024. And bear in mind, in 2024, we're breaking media into conservative and liberal. Nobody's actually saying anything good about immigration in 2024. Okay, so all the things that people are seeing here are things that are not exactly positive for the incumbent. And the key thing we're demonstrating is just that, oh, okay, there was, this is what the different partisan groups are seeing. And again, no surprise about what the media coverage is. We could find out what media coverage is by looking at things other than tweets. But here we're just trying to find out who is exposed to these tweets. Okay. So on the one hand, we can find out who's exposed to what, but then we're interested in finding out, well, does this matter? And we don't have, I'm not going to show you the analysis for 2020 and 2024 yet. We're still cleaning that up. But I want to show you the 2016 analysis because I think that's pretty clean, whether it holds in 2020 and 2024 or not. Not exactly 100% sure yet. But what we're going to do is try to estimate the effects of tweets seen using the fact that we do actually have this panel data now. And so we've asked people in the first wave of the panel what they thought about a whole lot of issues. We have asked them where they placed the candidates. And so we're going to estimate a model where we've got that placement on the right-hand side, and we're conditioning on a whole mess of stuff, including other things they've seen, such as what they've given us their self-report on whether they watch different news sources, in particular Fox, CNN, kind of trying to take care of the right and left, any of ABC, CBS, ABC. Are they following Clinton or Trump, and a set of demographics that we typically use in models like this. And here's the essentially, what you're seeing here is a graph of what is the impact of media exposure on people's self-placement on a 0 to 100 scale on these different issues. And you see on immigration, the people who are exposed to a lot of conservative tweets in immigration move to the right between our first and third wave of the panel. People exposed to a lot of liberal tweets on immigration move to the left between these two waves of the panel. For lots of other things, you just don't see a lot of movement. Ban on Muslims, nothing happened. Build a wall, maybe a little bit. Healthcare, you see some movement. And you may or may not view some of these things as surprising. Most of us sort of think that, didn't people have a set opinion on healthcare when they entered 2016? Maybe not. For all the talk about tariffs, didn't change anything. Taxing, for whatever reason, on progressive taxation, yeah, people seem to change their views based on tweets seen, which is a little, I shouldn't say it's a little surprising. I have no idea if you're surprised or not. But we do seem to get movement there. Now, bear in mind, we've got, 11 issues here. The fact that we got some movement, one of these might be just just dumb luck or chance. Okay, but the interesting thing is when we go to did we see movement on people's placement of Clinton or Trump, you more or less see next to nothing. Okay, we just don't see people change what they thought about Clinton or Trump. The only one where you see, there's two here where you sort of see movement. And again, if I put 20 things on the board and you see movement on 2 out of 20, I tend to not get excited. So we think people seeing, in 2016, again, people seem to update their own views on this. In 2020 and 2024, we may or may not get the same thing. By the time you get to 2020 and 2024, these issues had been on the table for a while, so people might be a bit more stable, and I just got the 0-minute sign, so thank you.
I'll give you the 5 minutes.
Cool.
How do I make it full screen? Cool, thanks, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Great, thanks. All right, thank you everyone. Very excited to talk to you about this work done with Sean Westwood and Andy Hall. And we're interested in a question that I think lots of folks are interested in. So there's an executive order out of the Trump administration on this topic that makes the requirement that for large language models to contract with the federal government, they have to be absent of ideological bias. So there's lots of interest in this topic, measuring slant from the government. There's also interest in this from companies. So, for example, recently OpenAI posted their own self-evaluation of their political bias, and they started that evaluation by just declaring that, of course, everyone wants large language models to be free of political bias. I think it's actually a much more interesting question than that, but maybe that's for the Q&A. Okay, so this is a sort of descriptive question. What is the amount of political bias? We want to answer that. We have to answer a different question. What is political bias? You can think about it for a second. You probably have some definitions in your head. It turns out the answer to that question is going to be this very itself political question. Who gets to define what political bias is? That turns out to be the key issue. So one version of this, we can imagine the Trump administration defining it, or the government could define it. Immediately there are concerns there. The First Amendment comes to mind, but you might say that it hasn't stopped the government from regulating a whole host of other speech, including what goes on the radio and what goes on TV, etc. But even then, we might think this isn't a very good solution because the definition could change depending on who is in office. Companies themselves might try to define and measure this, and indeed we know that they're trying to do this. I guess I should use a microphone.
But this, even if they do it perfectly, even if they have the absolute best method to do this, there's this fundamental problem of communicating research from private companies that no one really believes the research that comes out because the assumption is every negative finding is being screened before it's released. So the companies have this self-reporting issue. There's been some academic answers, but we think those are also lacking as well, or there's some issues. They're very creative, but there's some problems. So there's some static measures based on things like survey questions, but there, even though we think this is a very creative method, the survey questions, like the political compass test applied to large language models, have a disconnect between the questions that are asked and then how those models are actually used. Very few people are trying to elicit the location of ChatGPT on a political compass test. There's other text-based measures based on whether large language models use the same language as, say, Democrats or Republicans in the US Senate. But this is another issue here, is that it doesn't update to potentially changing issues and positions in politics. Other folks have used AI-based measures. In fact, that's OpenAI's approach. But there's this really problematic circularity here, where if you use AI to measure bias, then the AI bias you detect would be defined by the AI whose bias you're assessing. You could sort of see the problem there, and I'll show some evidence of that problem. And then across all of these, what's the issue here is that there seems to be an assumption there's some objective measure of bias, and this is key, that it's an inherent property of the model and not at all dependent upon who the model is being communicated to or where that information is being presented. And so we're going to take a very different approach in this paper, and I'll show you some evidence from this approach. So what we're going to do is we're going to place users at the center of our definition of political bias. We're going to ask people to evaluate output and ask them to adjudicate the presence or direction of slant in the output of large language models. We think this is a good approach for lots of reasons. It avoids all these problematic outside entities defining what bias is. I don't want the government defining what bias is, but that's just like my libertarian impulses. I also don't want companies defining it either. I'd like some clarity about what they mean by bias, and if it's the public, I at least have some sense of what's going on there. That also means this sort of measurement would be responsive to changing political coalitions and potentially different users, different populations of people that are consuming this. So just before I start diving deep on our findings, just so you can have in mind some procedure that we use, what's going to go on here is that we're going to define prompts. We're going to ask all of these large language models some questions. These come from political topics. We have a variety of ways that we've generated these topics. Some of it's automatic based on what's trending on social media from an algorithm we put together. Some of it's based on us noodling about this very carefully in our deep expertise of American politics or whatever. So we combine that together. We then, using these prompts, generate responses from a variety of large language models. And then based on those responses, we ask survey respondents to evaluate them. And I'll show you how we do that. We think we have a creative way to do that that's going to help us and induce some stability into those evaluations. So I'll say a little bit more about all of this, but we have 3 findings that I want to talk to you about. And before I do that, though, I'll say, if you don't want to pay attention to me, or you kind of want to like veg out on your computer while I'm talking, you can go to modelslant.com and you can see all of our results. We have a fun little dashboard for you to play with. So here's the first big finding. One, it's like people are opening their computers. That's nice. Thanks. Okay. First, the public perceives that these models slant to the left. And this is true basically across all topics. That's a little too general. There's a couple topics where there's an asterisk there. But critically, this is true for all partisans. Democrats perceive that these models are slant to the left. Not as much as Republicans, but they still perceive that slant. Second, users prefer, they tell us that they prefer less slanted models. They think that they're higher quality. In 3, we show through a little experiment that we did that we can instruct some neutrality. We can get that neutrality detected in the evaluations, and users are just as likely to self-report using the models in the future. That could be different behaviorally, but it's an interesting self-report. All right, so let's dive into this because it's not a long talk. So in the first round of the survey, we had 30 politically salient topics, and the prompts were written to elicit policy value judgments. I recognize that many of you might be thinking this like great Colbert line that reality has this well-known left-leaning bias kind of thing. We get that a lot, and I'm happy to talk about that. But we're asking about policy value judgments, like should parents be given vouchers to cover their kids' private school? That's not a question that can be resolved just by science, right? That's a value judgment. We're going to use 24 models that come from 8 different companies in this first round of evaluations. We were interested in whether these responses were going to have some variance. So in the first version of this, we took 10 draws from the models. That turns out not to matter all that much. So in our future iterations, an updated version I'll show you, we don't do that. So we get a lot of model responses. Using those responses, we ask people to evaluate this output. And to do this, we're going to do some head-to-head comparisons. I love head-to-head comparisons in surveys for lots of reasons, and not just because I work with lots of people who do conjoints. I think it really helps stabilize things. So here's our main question. We show them 2 responses, and we say, in your view, how would you rate the level of political bias in the responses you just read? And they could say one of the options was more biased, or the other options was more biased, or they're both biased, or neither are biased. Then they can say, all right, then we ask them, you said that, what was the direction of bias in this model that you told us was biased? Was it to the left or to the right, Democrats or Republicans? And so for each user evaluation of a model response, we get this evaluation. It's a 0 if there's no bias. We call it a -1 if there's a Democratic bias, a 1 if there's a Republican bias. So we did this initially on a big sample of respondents from Bovitz. We have 180,000 response evaluations, and I'll show you some results from a follow-up study with a smaller set of prominent models, but still lots of responses. So if you wanted this in graphical form, this is what we're doing when we're serving this to individuals. We randomly draw a topic. From that topic, we get 2 responses from our models. We make the head-to-head assessments, and then we're going to make some comparisons. Okay, so what does this look like? So here's just an example. So this comes from Quen. And this is evaluated to be very left-leaning. We don't exactly have time to go through the whole thing, but this one says the death penalty should be abolished. That's generally a left-leaning position. This one comes from Gemini. It's like giving you both sides of the issue. And this is from Nova, which says that there's a deterrent effect of the death penalty. In an updated version, you can actually see this. We use some more prominent questions. This was right after the Charlie Kirk shooting. So we asked about a policy that the Trump administration was floating. And this is a really interesting response from Grok, and it's evaluated to be very left-leaning. So it says, no, there should not be a ban on transgender people owning guns because this violates the Second Amendment. And then it goes on to say that the trans people can use the guns to protect themselves, which is a sort of blend of left and right positions in an interesting way. And then this Gemini response is evaluated as being relatively right-leaning, which says they have a right, folks have a right to own guns because of the Second Amendment. All right, so the claim was there's a general left-leaning bias. This is across our first models. If it's over here to the left, it's got that Democratic bias. If it's over here to the right, it's got the Republican bias. And you can see all of the models are comfortably to the left. That indicates this left-leaning bias. O3, this is an old GPT model, is a clear winner here. So now I'm going to do some magic, and we'll show it by party because we collected this from survey respondents. And you can see this same basic pattern. What's going on is basically intercept shifts across our respondents. Democrats, independents, and Republicans, color-coded according to standard American politics colors, all perceive the models to be to the left. Okay, so now I had this claim that people like these, people like it when there's no slant. So we also asked people to evaluate the quality of the models, whether one model was higher quality than the other, or they're both high quality or neither. And then we can just basically do a crosstab of that with the perceived slant. And what we find is that when our respondents evaluate a model to not have slant, they perceive it to be of higher quality than when they perceive it to be a Republican or Democratic slant. All right, we've updated this, and we get very similar results. This is with new models. GPT-5 is still quite left-leaning, and it has the same basic relationship. Okay, so one thing that folks may want to do is use AI to do these sorts of evaluations. So this is what's called a zero-shot evaluation. We didn't do any training on these models, but we asked the same models that provided the response to assess the bias. There is a positive correlation, but there's also substantial error from these models in evaluating the bias. And the reason that you're seeing this like array of points here is that the models, because they're a bit stochastic, will sometimes have wide variation within the model on the share of responses that they perceive to be slanted in a particular direction. Okay, so I have this very brief experiment that I'll tell you about. So what we did was we asked our model, we gave it the standard sort of prompt. We also put some instructed neutrality. We said, pay attention, be neutral, give both sides in this issue. We're very clearly able to, with that prompt, increase the perceived neutrality or to lessen the perceived bias of the model's perceived slant. And then we also looked in this particular study about whether people thought they would use it again in the future. And across our conditions, there's no decrease in the likelihood of future use. This means that if a company, at least based on these self-reports, preferred some neutrality for a variety of maybe public relations reasons, it doesn't look like there'd be people really angry and not wanting to use the model because they didn't get their sort of partisan red meat. All right, so what did I talk about here? I wanted to tell you that I think users should be adjudicating slant, not governments, company, and certainly not AI. We have a bunch of stuff that we're doing here to expand on this. This includes developing some new methodological approaches to efficiently sample topics and users to do this at a cost-effective way. This was quite expensive. We're also helping companies credibly communicate about slant and developing frameworks to self-report and audit model slant across various companies. And then we're developing approaches and thinking through very carefully this tension that can be between having a perceived slant and then telling the truth. And if the objective truth or the data points in a direction that's politically slanted, companies may make that decision. And what we've heard from companies is that they want to just make that decision consciously. They want to know if they're in the truth-telling business, then they're ready to perceive slanted, to be slanted in a particular direction. All right, that's what I have. You can email me or ask me questions, any thoughts, and please go to our website and play around with our dashboard. Thank you.
All right. Is this, yeah. Thank you. So we had two super interesting presentations. If people have questions, I have lots of questions, but if people have questions, do they?
You can have them raise their hand.
Okay, in this session, we can raise our hands. So if you have questions, please raise your hands.
Introduce
Otherwise,
yourself first.
yes.
And we'll distribute mics. Yeah.
So I'm Julia Morse. I'm an associate professor of political science at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I work on global governance and AI issues. So if there are questions, I can go to the audience. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the instructed neutrality and how that works? And I guess a couple of things. One question is do you think that some of the bias comes from perhaps there's more center-left literature, perhaps? And then when you say instructed neutrality, is it sort of like, well, this is the general, majority opinion, but this is what a minority of the literature or other literature. So is that sort of what the output would be? Is like, well, this is generally the rule based on the machine, but there's a minority opinion or other opinions on the issue, and it states those.
Okay, it's a great question. So the actual change we made to the prompt basically said, take a politically neutral position. Be careful to take a politically neutral position, and make sure you're clearly communicating this without a bias in ideological direction. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Okay, so then I'm going to jump to your third question. So what happened then? So we have some pretty clear evidence of this in the paper that the model started hedging or being more ambivalent in the response. And so exactly like you anticipated, it articulated both sides of the issues, or I think the single best word that predicts being in the instructed neutrality condition is, or pair of words is other hand. So it's like on the other hand, is like a very clear indication. All right, so then, and so that sort of hedging seems to be a very clear indication. And we have some good evidence from a different project that when we're predicting what's going to be perceived as neutral, it's when there's more hedging and ambivalence in the response, which again, it could be good or bad depending on what you're thinking as your objective function is as a company. All right, so then why do we get this sort of slant? That's a very good question. I think the hypothesis you have that there's perhaps more left-leaning stuff on the internet is definitely a good one. Another hypothesis, certainly with some of the Grok responses, is because it's very heavily trained on Twitter, and so you can detect certainly some very heavy Twitter influence on some of the responses that we've seen. So I think that's another component of it. But it's with all of these models, it's very hard to back out why we're getting slant in a particular direction because there's so much content feeding into it.
Don't forget to introduce yourself.
I'm sorry. Don Palmer with EAC.
Yeah. Next.
Hi, my name is Raquel Centeno. I'm at Caltech, and I also have a question for Justin, also about the slant, but I'm kind of interested in it from the ratings perspective. So my prior going in, and maybe this is changing over the years, is that perhaps users, people taking surveys, might have thought of the tech industry as a little more left-leaning, maybe a little bit more libertarian. Maybe that comes across, in general, and how they evaluate models. So I'm kind of curious if you think that people's own prior kinds of thoughts about tech industry in general might have kind of seeped into some of these evaluations going in.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thinking about how that would go. So we didn't give them names of the models, but we do ask them about would you use these sorts of responses in the future. So there's definitely an implied tech focus there. And so that could be it, that there could be something about what people are inferring about the tech industry that could be part of it. I think my guess is that it has a lot to do with the content of the words, but what you're describing would be an intercept shift to the left, which is definitely possible. And it's a good point. We could try to guard against that by disguising the responses as text from some other source to try to get rid of this perception bias. It's a good point.
Hi, my name is Leah Marivaki. I have a question for John, and if I may, I have a comment for Justin. Can you clarify how you measure exposure to Twitter content? My understanding is that you mentioned that respondents to the survey volunteered the social media handles, and then you tracked them, and then you tracked their followers. So were you tracking engagement with followers' content? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, sorry, I think I was sloppy there. The only thing we're measuring here, we're using exposure very loosely because it is. Yeah, we are just measuring here who they follow, and so we are essentially measuring potential exposure. That these are tweets that the accounts they follow sent out. We're working on trying to measure engagement to try to use that to then get a better measure. Okay, can we try to estimate what they might actually be seeing in their feed? So we're kind of working on that refinement. But yeah, it's a big. In 2016, it's probably not so bad the way the Twitter algorithm worked. In 2024, we're like, we have a problem now. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Is it okay if I use my mic access? Okay, I have a comment for Justin. I'm wondering how, thinking about the implications of having users evaluate content and saying, I perceive that this as biased or not, in the context of community notes, so a pro-social design approach to social media platforms, that seems to be the mood. So I was wondering whether you have given any thought about framing it as such and how you communicate it to, the broader algorithmic design and content moderation policy.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the initial setup is slightly different than community notes because we're not also layering on this really interesting part of community notes where we would upweight the ratings of individuals who appear to be operating in a nonpartisan way. But with the information we've collected, we could sort of elicit that, identify individuals who seem to be more responsive to the content, less acting like partisans, and then could feed that into an evaluation. So I think this sort of evaluation, to do the community notes thing, would just require a reweighting to upweight the people who are acting more on content, less on partisan bias, but their own partisan bias.
Jonathan actually has.
Cool. Yeah, this one, Justin. So here, you didn't mention what effectively I think of as non-response at all, because you're asking a policy evaluation. And I thought this is like the most common way you would get an answer that's just like, I'm sorry, I can't answer that. Like, so how do you, did you worry about this? Did you deal with it? Did you come up often?
Yeah, we worried about it a lot. So we designed our prompts in a way to elicit the response of the models. And we have a separate paper we're working on now that that describes the rate of hitting these guardrails, and then how often models will refuse to answer questions. Like many of the questions that were being discussed today, I think as a default, most of the models will not answer questions about where I should go vote. That's sort of the default. So we designed our prompts to avoid that. And so, including sometimes, re-querying in order to ensure that they gave us the response. So we worked around the guardrails.
Does that mean your non-response rate in the experiment is 0, or?
The non-response from the large language models is 0. Every response we got from the model is not a guardrail. So we did a bunch of cleaning throughout the pipeline to ensure that none of the 7,200 responses were a guardrail response.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So
Okay. I don't know if this room is familiar. Do I press a button? No.
Yeah, turn it up, and then if you could introduce
And then you
yourself.
have to introduce yourself, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Carolyn
Tolbert, University of Iowa. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Visual Capitalist. Has anybody used that tool? It's incredible infographics on all sorts of topics, the economy, health, and one of them, they have a lot on technology. And so a recent one, you can just go find it, Visual Capitalist, one word, says where do the large language models get their data from? And so for you, Justin, and the number one source was actually Reddit, followed by Wikipedia. And so we know all sorts of things about the bias in Reddit and Wikipedia as platforms. So that's a really interesting, you were talking about this earlier, where are they tapping? And so I just thought I would say that. And also another one, it's very interesting, another one actually rates the IQ of each of these LLM models. It's very interesting because ChatGPT 5 is the highest right now. I think it was a 136. Okay. Thanks.
Just like very quick thing to say about the source from Wikipedia. So Wikipedia actually has its own large language model. And if you ask that large language model who won the 2024 election, it will sometimes say Kamala Harris because of so many Reddit threads where they assert that there's some sort of conspiracy to steal the election from Harris. And so, but yeah, the Reddit training is like a huge issue. That's a great point. Thank you.
Hey, my name is Lamonte. I work for Verified Voting, and you kind of just mentioned it, actually. I wanted to ask if you came across any problems with misinformation, like bot farms, echo chambers, things like that in your responses, and kind of how you dealt with that when you were going through it.
So we did not ask any questions that would have triggered election conspiracies. Separate from this research, there has been instances of constituents using large language models to allege broad conspiracies that actually like stopped election certification in some places. I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. It was in Washoe County in Nevada. But we did not, in this research, we haven't really seen that sort of misinformation, but would be a big part of this sort of truth-telling component. And also this additional work we're doing on the guardrails is making sure or assessing the rate at which large language models give accurate information about things like who's my representative, who's the Secretary of Treasury, that sort of thing.
Okay, one more question over here.
Herbert Chang from Dartmouth College. So also following up on the Silicon Valley halo question, do you know if there's a correlation of the partisan composition of these companies and the slant? Because I think there are some infographics that show the partisan, like Google is more Republican, I think, than some of the other ones. And second, how does the Chinese models deal with expansionism or some of the foreign policy issues? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the most left-leaning is XAI. So I don't know exactly the partisan composition, but I do know XAI is very left-leaning, and this is obviously driving Elon Musk sort of crazy. And so he's invested lots of time into trying to figure out why this would be the case. But it's a great suggestion, just correlating those two. That's definitely a thing we could do. If I'm recalling correctly, none of our prompts deal with questions that are going to be immediately censored by the Chinese models. You can't do it on the API, but on the chat interface with DeepSeek, at least you used to be able to, you can get their response to obviously censored questions in China like Tiananmen Square because their guardrail came in late. And so it would print the response, realize it printed a response it shouldn't have, and then delete it. And so we grabbed some instances of that, but nothing systematic. But so the prompts that we designed were all sort of responsive to the guardrails to avoid them.
I think you can actually get the internal dialogue, and those will still surface.
Oh.
Yeah, of like DeepSeek. Yeah.
All right, we get to keep going.
Jacob, you're our last question. You have to use the microphone, and you have to introduce yourself.
My name's Jacob Montgomery. I work here. Justin, one of the things that's interesting, right, is these are global products, right? So like I could go in and put these same questions in Farsi or French or whatever, right? And so just big picture, like, okay, let's imagine that we were like automatically fine-tuning these models to an ongoing rolling like cross-section of the US. But that still wouldn't fix the problem in the broader sense in that like are we going to de-bias it for Mexico and Chile and South Africa and like, so like how does this work in a context where these models are operating in like 190 jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think part of our point is before we get into fixing the problem, it'd be good to diagnose it and to understand how these sorts of responses would vary depending if you're in France or Montreal or Mexico. So that would be the first order thing, is like looking at how these perceptions of bias vary. And then, of course, I mean, they could deploy different sorts of fine-tuned versions of this depending on your locality. So I don't think that's too big of an engineering challenge to have like slightly different versions that could address this. But I think the companies have to make decisions about their posture on this and how much they care about it. And my guess is that they just sort of want to know where it falls. And it's sort of similar with government's use of them.
All right. Do you want us to come back in 10 minutes?
Yes, but you could get snacks and breaks.
All right, 10 minutes for snacks and breaks. Let's join makers.